would have been presenting with what looked like depression, but actually it wasn't depression.
What was it?
Well, now I can look back and go, actually, I was exhausted with living in a neurotypical world when I was neurodivergent.
Okay.
And that is something, I know we're going to talk about it later, but it's something that's now fascinating me, especially for women.
Me too.
And
I think we are only starting the conversation.
It is just, and also, but the correlation between burnout and neurodivergent. Interestingly, like I'm fascinated with AI at the moment, and I can so grasp the concept and the workings of it because it's visual, it's auditory, it's like it's so dynamic. Whereas the way that, which is pretty much still the way school is delivered, it just didn't sit with me. So I felt stupid. So I had that perfectionism, even though I was lying about my capabilities, but I had to be the best, which was just chronic anxiety and stress every single day.
Really?
And it wasn't really till I hit my 40s that I started to realise there would be self-doubt along there, but I realised, actually, I'm not stupid. I just learn differently.
Okay. Like so many others in this world, actually, and we're only scratching the surface of neurodivergency. You can get away with it. You can mask it a lot as a woman, even though you don't realise that you have it.
Yeah.
But then also, did you find you could is the reason you maybe became burnt out as well? You could do 10 tasks in one go, or like start 10 tasks in one go, not finish them, feel guilty that you haven't finished them, move on to the next task. And it's this constant cycle of trying to do too much at one time.
Yeah.
Filling your day with 20 things when it should be 3.
Yep.
And then always feeling guilty that you didn't get it done. Siobhan, you are very welcome to the Lower Down Experience.
I'm so excited to be here.
I'm happy for you to be here too. So we got together because you are a clinical psychotherapist and you've written a book on burnout and you have had a late diagnosis of ADHD, ASD, you've had alcohol issues, you have a crazy life, really interesting life, but also you've learned a lot from your mistakes, I suppose.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think that's the big thing. That's why I am so invested in what I do with burnout is I've made the mistakes. I've tried all the different routes to sort of stick bits of plasters over myself, which didn't work, which I see people doing. And I've finally figured out how to address the root causes and then use micro habits, not the big things that people say, you know, get up at 5 a.m. and journal for 20 minutes. And none of that's realistic. So I've taken everything, all my sort of, I hate using the word failures, but all my experiences and put them all together and made it simpler for other people to go from potential burnout, stop chronic burnout happening and put them on a path to being able to have what I call positive health.
Okay. What's burnout?
Well, the World Health Organization classified it as an occupational phenomenon. It is not yet a medical condition, which I'm really happy about, because as soon as it becomes a medical condition, people are going to go, still in this hustle culture, I can keep going, but here I'll take a pill that's going to allow me to keep going.
Oh, that's interesting that you think that, actually.
Yeah.
And it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because once something is medicalised, we suddenly come up with a pill for it, is that it?
Well, we live in a world where we want the quick fix option. Lifestyle changes are not the quick fix option because it means we have to sit down, we have to look at the way we are living our lives. What's causing our burnout? Because there's internal, there's external. It's emotional, mental and physical exhaustion brought on by emotionally demanding situations over long periods of time.
So is burnout then, once you are, and I'm using the quotation marks, burnt out, can you not function? Are you in bed all day, every day? Or can you still function while you're burnt out, but just you're not realising it?
Well, I suppose they say there's 12 stages of burnout. I think that's just complicating, and life is complicated enough. You've got people who will push themselves. The interesting thing I see with people is it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter what age you are. If you are somebody who is a high achiever, you are more predispositioned to experience burnout because of the pressure you put on yourself. So the early stages of burnout, people will start to feel a bit disconnected, disillusioned with their work. They might recognize that quite quickly, pull back, and actually start addressing it. If they're just keep going, we're now getting into just like burnout. Generally, people will be signed off work, probably 3-4 months. They'll go back into a phased re-entry back into their jobs. And then we've got chronic burnout. And when you hit chronic burnout, you will be out of work I've seen clients be out of work for 12, 18, 24 months.
Is it eclipsed with depression though and anxiety? Because, is it all under one umbrella where if someone's out sick, say with their, we would have said years ago with their nerves.
Yeah.
It's stress related. They become depressed as a result, maybe anxious or anxious before the depression. So is it all intertwined then? Well,
so that's where I'm saying it's not a medical condition. So burnout as it stands isn't a medical, but things that the knock-on effect of burnout not being addressed can cause medical issues. So depression, anxiety, a lot of issues around gut health, interestingly, huge issues around gut health. I've had clients who've presented to hospital with pains in their chest and down their arm, convinced, and these are people in their 30s, convinced they're having a heart attack, who have had their ECGs done, everything, their bloods, and they're not. It's stress related. It's unmanaged stress. It's just that continual. So yeah, the knock-on effect of not addressing burnout can have very serious implications to your mental and physical health.
So can you give me a typical example of someone who might present to you who's burnt out?
So somebody who is burnt out, they could be in a job that 6 months ago, or a career that they were really passionate about, that they were really invested in. They got a lot out of it. They are now experiencing lack of motivation. They can't seem to get a handle on their structure in their day, in their week, in their role. That's then causing that self-doubt and inner critic. They're irritable with family, they're irritable in work. So they've gone from their normal, and when I say their normal, I mean their normal, not society's normal, their normal, to not living normally, emotionally, task-orientatedly, physically. So what happens is then they start getting really irritated with what they can't do, what they could do 6 months ago. So instead of having the cognitive ability to go, oh, there's something up, I need to address it, the focus becomes on beating themselves up internally that they're not dealing with work or life the way they did 6 months ago.
And is the fact that they can't deal with it, is it to do with the fact that they've overworked, they're not sleeping enough? What kind of is the, I want a reason.
the reason it happens, well, you see, this is where I think burnout is really toxic. People just think it's overwork in work. We look at the healthcare profession. I mean, that's, if we just park the healthcare profession to one side, just to not lump all professions in, it can be overwork. It can be that high performance, that overachieving, perfectionism. So it can be internal factors, and it can be a contribution of external factors. It can be a toxic work culture. It can be completely being out of your depth. There are so many people at the moment who are doing two roles instead of just their own role. They might be covering for somebody who is out with burnout. And that work still has to get done. So there are the external factors, but there's also the internal factors, the pressure that we put on ourselves. Are we not good at asking for help? And, I think that's a really critical part of this, having the ability to know when to ask for help and how to ask for help. We're not great at it. We see it nearly as a slight sign of failure, of not being good enough, of not being
Weakness almost.
Yeah. Whereas asking for help, if there's, an area that you are not good at, or you've got too much on your plate, asking for help allows you to keep going. It's not about, it allows you to give up. It's not weakness. It's distributing the workload.
But do you find so if someone comes to you and they're in an organization where they feel that they're becoming burnt out is it easy for people to ask for help though? Like, do the organizations have it in place? You know, I know you said let's park the healthcare workers, but like, you know, they're the ones that spring to mind. Plus I work in the, you know, in healthcare myself.
Absolutely.
So, you know, you might say, okay, so a nurse, say for instance, a typical nurse on a ward is down, you know, she's got half the staff in the ward that she normally has. And I know this from speaking to midwives. They'd normally have 14 in the ward and they're working with 8, right? So, you know, you can't ask for help in that situation. So it's almost endemic, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's where the organization, and I'm very, very clear on this. We as individuals have a personal responsibility to our own health and well-being. And that's one side of it. Organizations, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the tech industry, wherever it is, they have a responsibility to support individuals and their culture to positive health. And these are not the one-off roll Siobhan in to do a once a year around mental health week talk on burnout. That's 50 minutes and a couple of Q&A. That's not enough. There has to be a sustainable, honest well-being plan and culture that is not ticking boxes, that is people on board into a company or an industry, and from the get-go, it's part of the culture. It's not, oh, we have a little department and we do tick boxes. And that's what I do now, is get companies to look at what is happening, but bring on board the employees. So whether it's the nurses, this can't just come from the HR department going, we think this is what we need. We need the people on the ground who need it to be part of that conversation and part of putting out there, what do they need? And then how is that delivered?
Okay. So how did you get into all this?
There's the $1 million.
Did you by any chance become burnt out yourself?
Many, many times.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can have more than one episode of burnout, come back to life and then go back out in again.
Yeah.
Oh God, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
So tell me about yourself then, because then I think we'll get into what people can do to help themselves.
It's, you know, I think with me, and that was like when I burnt out, I probably burnt out in my early 20s the first time. And sure,
that was very young.
Yeah. Yeah. But I didn't, I suppose I now look back and there's a few other factors that I can now sort of attach to that burnout, but still burnout, but that keep going, that need to prove myself. You know, I see this in people as well. For me, I didn't finish school, so I didn't do my leaving cert. And it's still something, interestingly. And there's lots of people who went to college as an adult and for whatever reasons school didn't agree. But for me, that sat with me for a long, long time, most of my adult life. There was massive shame around that. So in any job that I had, because I didn't go to college, because I didn't do my leaving certs, you know, I didn't do the conventional route, I had to prove myself that much harder.
Did you feel you had to prove yourself? Or
yes.
Was it okay?
Oh, yeah, that was very much my internal working. I mean, I remember I was working in a record company in London, and I had said I could take shorthand. And I used to sit in with my boss at the time and squiggle, like literally do squiggles on the page, and then have to try and sit at my desk and from memory remember what he had said over like 5 different letters I had to send out.
You'd lied about the fact that you could do shorthand, was that it?
Well, yeah, because I needed the job, because I needed the money, because I needed to prove myself.
Yeah.
So I always had that very can-do. I would be a grafter. And I think because I didn't, you know, in school and I just heard blah, blah, blah throughout all my school years. You know, information didn't go in. So there was part of me that never wanted to say I couldn't do something because then I would be stupid.
And did information not go in because you didn't enjoy the way it was? Like when you look back on it now, did you have the type of brain that just couldn't deal with the way, I suppose, it was delivered to you, or was there other reasons why?
Yeah, I think it was the way it was delivered to me. Very old school. I'm 53, so you're going back to the 70s and 80s, and it was very stand up. A teacher standing up in front of the board and do this and this, and it just didn't. I couldn't put it together. Whereas, interestingly, like I'm fascinated with AI at the moment, and I can so grasp the concept and the workings of it because it's visual, it's auditory, it's like it's so dynamic. Whereas the way that, which is pretty much still the way school is delivered, it just didn't sit with me. So I felt stupid. So I had that perfectionism, even though I was lying about my capabilities, but I had to be the best, which was just chronic anxiety and stress every single day.
And were you labelled stupid in school then? Or was it just yourself that labelled? Did you do any exams and just perform poorly in them, or how?
I would have done the junior cert, which was inter, and I passed 5. So back then you had to pass 5 in order to get it. And I literally scraped by.
Okay.
But you see, I didn't know how to study. So reality, I look back now and go, well, actually, if I managed to scrape by on 5, not studying, and not like I would have sat there looking at the books, but didn't process the information. And I would have, my mum, who's an amazing woman, there would have been, and I think this happens, we get labeled, if you don't do this, you're going to be stupid, or you are stupid, or we then attach ourselves to those labels that others give us. And that becomes our narrative in our head. And that's what I took with me all through, I suppose, my 20s and even my 30s. And it wasn't really till I hit my 40s that I started to realize there would be self-doubt along there, but I realized, actually, I'm not stupid. I just learn differently.
Okay. Like so many others in this world, actually, and we're only scratching the surface of neurodivergency.
Yes.
In Ireland, in the world today, really. And we're going to get on to that. So bring me back to your 20s, where you had your first, what you think was your first burnout.
Yeah, because for me, what I would have started in my 20s, I would have been drinking in my late teens. I would have been doing what everyone else was doing.
Who wasn't?
Yeah, we're all, up to it was actually quite innocent devilment, actually, when you think about it. But it was in my 20s when I was working, I was living in London. That's when I would have started using alcohol as a crutch. So, and what I mean by that is it allowed me to be in social situations. It gave me that false energy. It masked a lot of things that I didn't understand about myself because I actually didn't know who I was. So I was trying to be like everybody else, which is a very common thing. So my alcohol would have contributed to my burnout because it was part of who I was. It was constant. I was also at that point working in the music industry. I'd started working in the music industry, and I was working in record companies, working in, you're working all day, but then you're still going to gigs and taking bands out and stuff. So it was like 18-hour days.
Would you have been drinking during the day or only at night time at the gigs, or would you have just been drinking all the time?
Well, like we might have been taking somebody out at lunch, or we have a meeting and it was, oh, well, sure, we'll go around the pub. We were based in Soho Square and it was very sociable. So yeah, it was like constant drinking. But that just led to anxiety and just like utter the fear. It wasn't even the Monday morning fear like I had, Tuesday and well, yeah. So so that all contributed, and I came home. I wouldn't have realized I was burnt out, but I came home back to Dublin, spent, a couple of years here. I was working. My mum had an employment agency and she would temp me out and temped and worked in different companies. And I sort of had that safety net of being at home. So I didn't go to a doctor, about burnout specifically, but I did go to a doctor to say how low I felt, because now, see, I would have been presenting with what looked like depression, but actually it wasn't depression.
What was it?
Well, now I can look back and go, actually, I was exhausted with living in a neurotypical world when I was neurodivergent.
Okay.
And that is something, I know we're going to talk about it later, but it's something that's now fascinating me, especially for women.
Me too.
And
I think we are only starting the conversation.
It is just, and also, but the correlation between burnout and neurodivergent. So,
okay.
So this, and that's why I don't kind of go, oh, well, that only happened because I was.
Yeah.
But because I didn't know what the root cause was, I was doing things like taking antidepressants and still drinking. I was putting Band-Aids over the symptoms, but not addressing what was wrong. And even for those who are neurotypical experiencing burnout, that's often the case. They're addressing the symptoms, not what's causing it.
Well, we know that people will self-medicate whatever way they can to calm their mind. So I know that you were saying that you have ADHD, which is attention hyperactivity deficit disorder. What? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Yeah. ASD, which is...
I'm on the spectrum, on the autistic spectrum.
Okay. And then, so dealing in the music industry and in that kind of high pressure job where you are, I suppose you should be constantly on and you're meeting people.
Yeah.
And if you are ASD, you probably maybe aren't naturally predisposed to entertaining people. Is that right? So that might be the... Oh,
I was in the worst possible job.
Are you exhausted even like pretending to enjoy yourself in these situations?
Exhausted, which is why I then drank when I was in those situations, because because I didn't realize. That's why I was emotionally exhausted as opposed to physically. But that's what people do.
And that's what, you know, even I've had doctors on speaking about ADHD in children and the whole fear around children self-medicating with cannabis to calm their busy mind down. And that's the start of it, you know, so was there any other drugs that you tried?
Oh, but put them all out there. And yet, interestingly, like I never enjoyed taking drugs. I will say this with utter honesty. I loved rolling a joint. Okay. I loved the process. I loved the
sound, the smell. Okay, so
because it was a fully kinesthetic. It was so sensory. And then I get stoned and I wouldn't be able to talk. And everyone else seemed to be having a great time and laughing. And I would be so deep in my head that I was like, oh dear God, oh dear God. Like it nearly gave me, and then I, definition of insanity, do it again and expect a different response.
Yeah.
But so all the self-medicating I did, especially with the alcohol, didn't work. Mm-hmm. But I didn't cop that.
Okay.
Because it was the plaster rather than the root cause. And, I now realize, like I stand on stages and I deliver talks on burnout because I'm so interested in it. Love it. Not shy, but the small talk, networking-y bit afterwards. My brain's about to explode. I need to make sure I have nothing on the next day. Mm-hmm. So but I now know that about myself. So I created my world to suit me giving my best into the world, not getting burnt out, and going with my strengths, not my weaknesses.
Okay. So when you came back to Ireland after London and the music era, and you went to the doctor because you were feeling low, I assume you were prescribed
Antidepressants.
Prozac.
16 years on antidepressants.
And you were drinking as well?
And I was drinking.
Okay.
But I know, I can remember even saying, I'm not depressed. Like, I obviously was, but it wasn't because of whether the medical profession or those around me thought it was. That wasn't the reason why, which is, I went to therapy, that didn't work back then. I dipped my toe in all of these self-help areas, but nothing really worked because I wasn't connecting with it, because nobody was saying, you're burnt out. Why? Let's look at why you're burnt out. Let's figure out. I was in the wrong industry. My internal workings were contributing to. So none of that was getting addressed. So I just
can I ask you, sorry, when with the ADHD, did you find that because of the fact that you have ADHD, often people that have it, particularly women, and the fact that we can actually read a room, we can relate socially very well to people, versus, I suppose, male, and this is not a generalization, but men and boys tend to not be able to do that reading the room as well as we can. They're not as good socially if they have this disorder. So you can get away with it. You can mask it a lot as a woman, even though you don't realize that you have it. Yeah. But then also, did you find is the reason you maybe became burnt out as well? You could do 10 tasks in one go, or start 10 tasks in one go, not finish them, feel guilty that you haven't finished them, move on to the next task. And it's this constant cycle of trying to do too much at one time, filling your day with 20 things when it should be 3. Yep. And then always feeling guilty that you didn't get it done.
Yep. Yeah. Because the reality is, and this was something I found fascinating when I was researching for the book, is the term multitasking only came out in the 1970s, and it was put together to describe how the back end of a computer speaks to the other part of the back end of a computer. So it's like if we look at a computer now, how Excel tells, when you ask, you're in Excel and then you want to open a Word document and you're asking the computer to do it. That's multitasking, because it's still got the Excel open and now you've opened Word. We're not computers. So when we multitask, or we think we multitask, and I think it's really funny that we, the generalization that, women can multitask, men can. No, they can't do it. None of us can. Because if you're working on task A and then you've already got in your head tab B open, and you're switching, the time it takes for your brain to switch from A to B and back to A and be in the exact same place as you were when you stopped in A takes so much time and mental effort that we don't fully re-engage back with task A. And we really haven't given much attention to task B.
And do you think, though, then the ADHD, the burnout, this is all to do with the fact of the society that we're living in and the life that we're living and the fast pace? Would there have been, ADHD in a woman your age, or even, from when you were in your 20s up 200 years ago when we were all farming, it wouldn't have been as profound or pronounced. Would it have been? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Maybe not making sense.
Yeah, no. And I think it's really interesting because there are different strains of thought, and that ADHD can be caused by trauma. Therefore, you're not born with it necessarily. A trauma happens, and that can impact an adult having ADHD. The majority and the medical profession would say you're born with it, and it's genetic. So if there is a history of it in your family, however distant, you're more predispositioned. I don't know. You look back to even our grandmother's generation or great grandmother's generation, and you would, and I know with my grandmother, there would have been a dependency on sleeping tablets. There would have been a lot more what she's taken to the bed with her nerves. So, you know, was it still there? But it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And I'm just wondering, and I know I'm only recently diagnosed, you know, in January of this year, are there more people who are neurodivergent than neurotypical, who are all trying to live in the neurotypical world, where maybe we should be making it a neurodivergent world, and those neurotypicals should be coming to live in our world?
Do you know what? I do often wonder, do we all have a little bit of neurodivergency in us? Because there's definitely a lot more out there if you go on TikTok at all. Now, maybe it's just my For You page because I'm really interested in it, but all that comes up is ADHD, ADD, you know, autism spectrum disorder, all of those. So, and it does seem like every second person or every second celebrity is coming out saying, I have ADHD and it's been undiagnosed for years, and now my mind has been opened and I realize why I've made all these decisions in my life and maybe made all the mistakes. So it does beg the question. There's more people out there, I think, than we would have ever have thought possible. And
I think that's really interesting when you're saying celebrities, and I look at just even the last 6-12 months, the amount of comedians, actresses, actors. I think Lily Allen just came out quite recently in the last week or so, all very creative. So that creative mind, you then look at, I think, the very academic and very focused people who, again, would, whether it's dyslexia or ADHD or being on the spectrum, because they have that incredible hyper focus to focus on that one thing that interests them. And that might have interested them since they were 12 years of age, you know, that they're, whether it's astronomy or medicine, there's so many aspects. And I think that's the thing with ADHD and even ASD. Unless you have firsthand knowledge, whether it's a kid or yourself or another family member, we have a very, I suppose, very typical view of it. You know, a kid is just hyper, and they might be disruptive and destructive. There's antisocial behavior. We don't realize, like, I was never like that. My hyper is in my head. It's not, I could sit still and I wouldn't be fidgeting, but my brain, my thoughts would be going through the roof. So there is...
Are you like a swan where you seem so graceful and elegant on the outside and paddling like a mother?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, okay, so I want to hear now about when you came back to Dublin. Actually, do you have any funny stories from the music industry before we move on?
Oh, I've many, because actually, so I came back, but then I sort of, without realising, regrounded. But then, of course, I went back to London.
Oh, right, as you do.
As you do.
Just after you reground.
Reground.
So when you say regrounded, what do you mean?
So I was in a much more 9-to-5 working environment, didn't have that level of chaos going on.
But did you like the chaos too? Because what they say is that an ADHD mind as well might be more predisposed to going for a job in the emergency department of a hospital because they love their brain is constantly seeking out that dopamine hit where it's like, you know, oh, emergency here, emergency there, emergency everywhere. Oh, there's a doctor on the phone. Oh, I have to phone the doctor. Like, there's patients collapsing everywhere. Yeah. So you would find them in the emergency departments. You might even find them in pharmacies where they're doing 10 million tasks. You know, so even though it's not good for you and the dopamine hit, you're getting the dopamine hit from being constantly busy like that. So it's a strange one, isn't it?
And this is what is fascinating about it. So when I came back, I didn't have that. So I was in that sort of semi-calm environment, still drinking. Then I go back, working in the music, back in the music industry. Didn't realize, and it's only this year that I've understood the whole dopamine hit side of it, and that need for, and even if it's not as extreme as the A&E, but people who are people pleasers or problem solvers, you know, the person in the friend group that everyone else goes to because they fix the problem or, you know, they sort it out and they do it fabulously because they get a dopamine hit out of it. So you're not just getting, the obvious dopamine hits from alcohol, from drugs, from food, from shopping, which is a really interesting one. You can get your dopamine hit from people pleasing, from the chaos of A&E and things like that. I went straight back into the music industry because...
Were you bored out of your tree back in Dublin?
Probably, yeah. I think it was... But you see, it was the impulsive behaviors of ADHD. I probably just decided, tomorrow I'm going to go to London. It wasn't, there was never any plan. There was never any forethought into it because you've got that impulsive behavior. And then I got a job working for Elton John. So in my little world, it was well, I have to be really grateful for this because, it's Elton John. This is a great job.
Yeah. What did you do for him?
So he had his office was he owned a building in Olympia in London. Beautiful building filled with his art, the most magnificent art. And there were 3 floors.
Art that he drew or art that he collected?
No, art that he collected.
Okay.
I'm not sure if he actually drew it. Now, I mean, designing sunglasses, but I'm not sure if he so on the ground floor was the Elton John AIDS Foundation. The next floor was his husband, David Furnish's Rocket Pictures. And then we were top floor. And when I started, I worked within his management company. So he had taken over, he had created his own management team rather than being managed he'd been managed by a guy called John Reed, and there had been a very nasty split between them. So he was in charge of his management team. And I worked on the creative side. So we would deal with the record companies and his recordings and his gigs. And my biggest responsibility, which sounds hilarious, but it worked 12 to 18 months in advance, was his diary.
Okay.
Because, excuse me, he could be booked on tour 2 years in advance. So if an invitation came in for something, you had to make sure that he could say yes, or was he in China?
Oh my God, that fills me with panic.
Yeah.
Thinking that I'd have to have my diary sorted 2 years in advance.
Yeah. Well, can you imagine? That was my biggest...
Did you ever send him somewhere? Did you ever send him to the wrong place, or did you ever double book him by accident?
Oh, I'd go through it and the stress levels, because he'd want something and I mightn't have updated it because, again, technology wasn't the way it is now.
Okay.
You literally probably had an Excel spreadsheet. Oh, it was the utter fear and anxiety and stress. Certain things caused me that I didn't know how to manage. So I would just keep pushing through because I knew I could go for a drink at 6 o'clock. So again, that my perceived distressor was still with me. It was always in my back pocket.
Okay. And when did you realize you had a problem with drink, or did you always know and you just didn't? You always just pushed it down?
I think the drink thing is really interesting. This November, I will be 16 years not drinking. I would, during my drinking years, when it got to the end of my drinking, so 15 and a half years ago, I had my 2 boys, they would have been teeny tiny, and I would have been drinking 7 days a week. And I don't say this being proud or, trying to go, wasn't I great? My nights in, and I've always been a single mum, my nights in, sort of the Monday to Friday, would have been corporate work, pick the kids up from creche. I would have picked up 2 bottles of wine. So Monday to Friday, between 6 and 9, I would have drunk 2 bottles of wine and still maintained my house, the boys. I wasn't sitting on the sofa drinking and then running around in chaos. Mm-hmm. It was the equivalent of somebody else having a cup of tea and getting the dinner ready and getting their baths ready. But
were you always a bit out of it though? A little bit?
I suppose it's so hard to look back and remember because I kept it going.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't like drinking, but I did it because it quietened my mind.
Yeah.
It was medication. It wasn't about getting out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was just nearly, by the end of the day, the working day, my stress and anxiety would have, which I didn't know that's what it was. I didn't know how to name it. In order to sort of put me back into it's all okay, I can get up and do it again. That's what I used alcohol for.
Okay.
So by the time I stopped drinking, I would have been drinking 2 bottles a night, and I had gone out Halloween night, and I woke up the next morning and I just went, oh my God, I've got to go to another park. I used to call myself a park, excuse my French, whore. Like there wasn't a park in South County Dublin that I didn't know, every playground. And I just thought, I just can't do this. So it was the 1st of November. I said, I'm going to give up drinking for a month, just for a month. And at 6:00 every evening, instead of pouring Chardonnay into the glass, I would pour a Diet 7-Up into a wine glass. And I did that for about a month. And then it got to the 1st of December. And I had never said, I have a problem. I never sought help. I went, okay, I'm just going to do it for another month. And that went into another month and another month. And now...
So you never went to AA or
never went to AA. And I suppose what I think, I've never worked within the addiction space. What I would say about myself, and I can only speak about myself, is that alcohol was not my primary addiction. Sugar is my primary addiction. So for me, stopping drinking actually wasn't an issue because I wasn't addicted to it.
But how was your busy mind when you gave it up then?
It was still busy because remember, my busy mind was still busy. I only got that temporary relief, for those couple of hours that I did drink. And it wasn't even relief. It's like turning the volume down.
Mm-hmm.
So I took up running. I did the Dublin Marathon. I started training. Like I'd take something out of my pot and I put something else back in the pot. So, and I still had sugar. So for me, sitting down at night, and I have turned the dial on this down, but I would have substituted back then, like I could eat a couple of bars of chocolate because food also, the process of eating allows you to escape the thoughts in your mind because you don't realize you're focusing on eating.
But you're also getting a dopamine hit from eating because
you're back to the dopamine hit.
Yeah.
So,
but humans in general, they want some kind of dopamine, whether it be drugs, alcohol, sex, food, exercise.
But you see, I think what's happened is because of the crazy fast-paced world we're in, we are getting our dopamine hits from social media. We're getting instant dopamine hits, but we're getting dopamine hits sitting on our asses. So we're not getting our dopamine hit from going outside for a 15, 20-minute walk without our phones and actually just being aware of what's around us. We're using, I have to go to the gym because I need to be skinny or I need to be fit or I need to, insert any one of those reasons. We're not realizing actually I get a really natural dopamine hit from whether it's the gym, going for a swim, going for a walk, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So our dopamine hits are much more commercial. They're the shopping, they're the food, they're scrolling,
because we're getting instant gratification from our phones all the time with whatever it is that we're getting, is our body becoming addicted to those dopamine hits and we're seeking them out more? Oh my God, the world's going mental. Yeah. It's actually quite sad.
Well, because it's like, and it's also the law of diminishing returns because if you're getting a dopamine hit and you feel good, well, would you not want another dopamine hit?
Yeah.
So I always find it really funny when, like, my mum is one of these people, you know, she'll buy a normal size bar of dairy milk and she'll say to me, yeah, no, I had half of it last night with a cup of tea and I put the other half in the fridge. I'm like, what? Why? How? Like, because I've eaten the bar of chocolate and I want another one.
Okay.
It's because for me so I'm either all or nothing.
Yeah, it would seem that way.
Yeah, very much. Well, I was.
When did you have your boys and how did you become a single mum, if I'm able to ask you that?
Yeah. So I was 36. I was late enough having my first boy. So I'd worked in London. I had actually got engaged to somebody and it was all the wedding was booked and all the rest. Anyway, that didn't happen.
Oh no.
So
why?
Oh God, Jesus, we'd be here until Christmas doing that one. To suffice to say, everything happens for a reason.
Okay.
You know, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Didn't seem like that now at the time.
I can imagine.
So I had moved back again. And I had got a job. The music industry at that stage was, you were either working sort of for U2 or really nobody. It wasn't
in Ireland. That was okay.
At that point, you know, from where I had got to in the UK, trying to find the equivalent back here as a female. Even 20 years ago.
Oh, really? It was difficult for females.
Yeah, because
why?
Well, I had done production. I had toured. I had done very male, perceived male roles.
Okay.
Being the only female on the tour bus in Taiwan and, stuff. But back here, one, there wasn't the scope in the Goldfish Bowl. There wasn't. Record companies were literally distribution centres of the record labels in the UK. You might have 500 people working in the UK. You could have 5 working in the equivalent label over here. So it just wasn't there. And I saw an ad in the paper for a charity manager for the Ronald McDonald charity. And sure, I thought, again, what the hell? Flew off my CV. Lo and behold, I got an interview. And I will always say, I think the only reason the whole board interviewed me that day was because the MD, who was an amazing, amazing man, he was English and he looked at my CV and went, she's interesting. And
Elton John?
Yeah, like...
Actually, what was Elton John like?
Laura, he was the most generous man I have ever come across.
Really?
I worked for him. I started June, July. And I was the last person in. And the majority of people at that stage, right down to housekeepers, and he'd 4 houses then, they were people who'd been with him for years. I was the last hire that Christmas. And I got I would say the boxes were 3 foot by 3 foot, 2 boxes from Fortnum and Mason's, of a hamper. Like there was magnums of champagne. It was just phenomenal. And that's what the last in, the little lowly last little girl in. And that year I gave him, what do you buy Elton and John and David furnish? But I bought him a copy of every one of Joseph O'Connor's books, because he had 4 houses and he's a big reader. So gave it to him. There was a big lunch before Christmas. The day after Christmas Day, Stephen's Day, when I went into work a couple of days later, but dated Stephen's Day, and I still have these, was a fax, because there was no emails, was a fax handwritten by David and Elton, thanking me for the Joseph O'Connor books, how much they loved them and that they were keeping them in whichever house it was. I think they were in Hawaii. They were sitting by the pool. He would have sent a fax handwritten personalized to everybody he'd got a present from.
Okay.
like that attention to detail is, I think, testament to the reality of the amount of people that are still so close to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, if something wasn't going his way, there'd be, you know,
bit of a diva.
Yeah. But an incredibly generous, with everything. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds nice.
Yeah.
So tell me, so Ronald McDonald, MD, saw your CV, thought, this one, I'm going to give her a job.
Well, I think initially it was just she would bring her in for the crack because, so anyway, they gave me a job and I was housed in the McDonald's head office. Now, I had never worked for a not-for-profit. So here I am again at 30, broken engagement, all part of me, very broken.
As a person?
Yeah, I was very, very broken, but putting on this incredibly brave face. Was housed in the head office in Clonskeagh, but it was just me. Like there was the board, who were some franchisees and people who worked for the McDonald's PR and an ad agency. And then were tasked with raising 3.5 million to get the Ronald House built in Crumlin Hospital, which I suppose that chaos and creativity, I was able to use my music industry contacts and people I knew and to get the first ball going. I mean, the tickets for the first ball were €1,000 a ticket, never mind 1,000 a table. But it was all the American McDonald's franchisees who bought it. It was utter chaos and it was fabulous on one level. But I was in constant stress because I actually had never done any of this before and was winging it left, right and centre. So drink was still a huge part of my life. And there is, I am getting, so I got one Christmas I was out drinking, met somebody, and actually it resulted in me getting pregnant very, very quickly at 36 years of age. And I made the decision to, even though we'd only known each other 3 weeks, which is not great.
There's plenty of us. There's plenty of us around today because our parents only knew each other 3 weeks.
You know, the things like...
Sure, we were put on this earth to procreate.
Absolutely.
And people, you know, the shock and the horror of it. Anyway, go on.
So there was no big white wedding. There was no wedding list or anything like that. And like, I suppose I'm jumping in stages. I had bought a house in Dublin, a very small house. So I had that and I had the corporate job and, you know, I suppose there was a bit of stability there in my life. And
so then you went and messed it all up by getting knocked up.
Children. So he's nearly 18. And then he was 9 months old and I got pregnant again. With their father and I had a very toxic relationship. Drink played a huge part in that.
Okay, for both of you. So
yeah, and you know, I think, and that's where I say I was very broken at that time and didn't realize. My self-worth would have been at an all-time low, and I allowed myself to be in a relationship that was absolutely not right or good for me. But I got pregnant with my second child, and I think one of the reasons, Laura, for that was I grew up as an only child, and I had this thing in my head, and I can only associate it back to this, is that I knew I wasn't going to be with their dad for much longer, or the long haul, or in any way like that. And I was still only 37 at this stage. And in my head was, well, what if I meet somebody else and then I have a child with them, or I don't know who I was thinking of. I didn't want this, my firstborn, to not have a full sibling, it was just something that was really important to me. And when I got pregnant the second time, it wasn't intentional either. It was just one of those things that happened. Don't know how that happened.
I can tell you. Whoops. Oh, whoops.
Whoops again. And shortly through that pregnancy, we split up. So from that point, by the time I came home with my second, there's 18 months between them exactly. They're March and September. When I came home with my second, I was completely on my own.
How did you cope with 2 babies?
Well, you see, I get asked this question a lot. I know no different. I've never had somebody do the night shift. I've never had somebody pick them up from crash. I tell a lie. My mum, when they were little, was great. But at the time, she lived in West Wicklow. She didn't live around the corner like she does now. So
you were working full time and paying crash fees for 2 kids. Did you have any money left over at the end of the month? Because it's expensive.
I didn't go out because remember, I was drinking at home.
Okay.
So, and that drinking, like the youngest would have been 6 months when I stopped.
Okay.
So, it didn't go on for a huge amount of time, but I didn't go out. I didn't spend that money.
Okay.
That, the dinners and, I do the odd going out, but because once I gave up drinking, one of the biggest realizations for me, and it wasn't that I became antisocial, but I realized that I didn't really like socializing.
I was going to say, they didn't really like people. Well, kind of.
It's, my tribe now, we're all very similar and we joke about it and we do things that we enjoy and,
You're saying yes all the time. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do that. Yeah, I know. I heard an expression, if you can count the amount of friends you have on one finger, that's enough. That is enough friends. Yeah. And that friend can be a partner or a sister, or it doesn't have to be, anyone outside of your intimate circle. So bring me along then. So you decided to quit the drink yourself.
Yeah.
And all of this is, you just didn't want to be going to the park, like with the kids and a hangover. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're working and you're raising 2 boys. But then when did the psychotherapy come in?
Well, I was sort of juggling all this, the boys and work and, keeping it all together. And I remember my boss at the time, so I moved from the house got built, the Ronald McDonald house got built. McDonald's itself offered me a job in communications in a role that hadn't been there before. So now I'm still in the main building, but I've switched from that creative bit into a very corporate, what McDonald's do in Ireland. It's the same in the UK. It's the same in the States, same in Italy. Big realization. I'm not a good employee. Which is great now that I work for myself. Not a good employee. And
why?
Like McDonald's was a brilliant company to work for. Couldn't fault them. I was part of the task force that put the information on the back of the tray liners on calorie intake. I don't care how many calories are in a Big Mac. I don't care if you eat a Big Mac or not. That's your choice. And I was doing work that I had no interest in.
But it's not then that you're a bad employee. It was just you were in the wrong job, no? Because for the creative side, when you're doing the charity,
but that's because I was
enjoyed that, yeah.
But you see, I really, in a funny way, I wasn't employed by anybody. I know I was, but I didn't have a boss.
Okay, yeah.
There was a board, and as long as I kept them up to date, it was just me, myself, and I. Okay. So sitting at a desk.
Yeah.
I didn't have a marketing department, didn't have, so it was the closest to the way I work in essence now than anything else that I've ever done. But being part of that, accountability and doing work in progress on a Monday morning,
Oh, God.
and all of that.
Shoot me.
Like because the reality is, and I know that this is, I suppose, feeding into the ADHD thing, I'll know that I have something that I need to finish. I haven't finished it, but I haven't forgotten about it, and it will get finished. And probably it won't get finished until about 20 minutes before it's needed, because that's when I would have, this is going back to my McDonald's days, that's because, procrastinate.
Feed off adrenaline, procrastinate.
And then work.
Leave it on the back burner.
Yep.
For the weeks that are coming up to the deadline.
Yep.
Leave it go. Constantly think about it, ruminate over it, and then literally pull out all the stops to get it done in the last 24 hours. That sounds a little bit like me. Mm-hmm. And you have the shame of it not being done, and it all, and somebody that works closely with me goes, why don't you just do it on the day that you're supposed to do it? And then it's done and you can box it off. But I just can't bring myself to do that. What is it? It's
nearly like I've started using ClickUp as, I've tried Asana and Trello to be organized. And I'm now trying, I'm relearning who I am with the ADHD and stuff. So I'm trying to use ClickUp. So I put all these tasks in, and I could sit up till 12 because I love it. It's great. It's nearly like being in school with the pink highlighters.
Oh yeah.
And I put all these things in, and you can put deadlines and you can put progress and all the rest. And then I'll get 3 emails over the next 3 days telling me this is overdue, this is overdue, this is overdue.
Does that not cause panic though?
Well, so no, not now, because now my self-compassion is I am trying to learn what's working, or how to work with myself instead of trying to conform.
Okay.
So again, it will get done. It absolutely, it's not that stuff doesn't get done or I don't care, but it's trial and error. It's trial and error to understand how to not get burnt out. It's trial and error understanding how my brain works. It's, if I said to you, Laura, let's just say you are ADHD and I have a system that is absolutely, this one system of the way you're going to live your life is going to work for you, and you do it and it doesn't work, and you go, oh, well, Siobhan said that's the one system that will work. Well, I won't try another one. Well, that's not very useful. So, but if I say, let's try this, see how you respond, see how your brain responds, how that works for you. If there's parts of it that work, we can pull that out, and then let's do that for a bit, and we can add to it. Let's bring in something else. And it's the same process I use for burnout recovery. It's let's start small bit. If it works, great. If it doesn't, let's pull back, let's adapt, because that's what we're doing. Every day we're adapting. So it's not, there's nothing that, one size fits all. And like, while I'm on a roll, the whole thing with self-care, I know I'm jumping.
Is getting your nails done.
I just feel we have been, and this really ties into the burnout, recovery, prevention, the hectic world we live in. We have managed to get sucked into this belief by the wellness industry that it's all external. And like by that, spa days, for those that can afford them, fabulous. For those that can't, if they're looking at things promoting, this is going to calm you down, this will make you great. How do they feel when they realize they can't afford a spa day? Like,
a spa day, I mean, I know that, like, yeah, they're great, they feel great, but they're a day.
It's an additional.
And then you go back to your own busy life. So it's about, you were saying, building in the micro habits. So how do we do that?
Well, first of all, we need to stop saying self-care. Okay. Right. You're banned from saying self-care. Right.
I actually don't like that word, because I think self-care reminds me of something hygienic, like cleaning your genitals or something.
Well, it's
yeah.
Well, I think because people fall into 2 camps, self-care, it's all tree hugger stuff. I am the most practical person. I have to be. I'm a single mum of 2 teenagers. I've been a single mum for nearly 18 years. I don't have time to float around hugging trees. Now, hugging tree is great crack. You know, being barefoot in the grass as long as there's no dog poo is great crack. But I have to keep my house going. I have to pay the mortgage. I have to find how to mind myself. I call it care of self. So from here on in, self-care is now care of self.
Okay.
Because care of self is not, oh yeah, I do Pilates on a Tuesday. That's my self-care. It's not a one-off thing. Or I went away on a weekend for a retreat. They're all lovely things. Like getting your nails done, getting your hair done. That's not self-care. That's maintenance, if that's your thing. You know, it's Botox. Whatever it is, that's not, oh, I'm treating myself. If that's your thing, that's your maintenance. Care of self is the way we think about ourselves, the way we talk to ourselves, that inner dialogue. It is prioritizing our sleep. It's prioritizing movement, because we need to get away from the word exercise. I can't stand that either, because it's
You're very cranky.
Oh, but
I don't like exercise.
But it's movement.
Okay, yeah, no, I know.
You know, like if
because exercise makes people think it's a task and a chore.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
This is, you know, if we, in movement, if you're sitting static at your desk all day or for an hour or two and you move, like you're feeling a bit jaded, you're not really thinking, you're just can't get what you're doing to work for you. If you stand up and move, you are changing your physical and mental state by simply moving down the corridor to make a cup of coffee or go into the bathroom. It is that simple.
Okay.
That's a micro habit. So if you're thinking, oh, movement, she's talking about going to the gym or Pilates or going for a run. Every single day I do 4 10-minute walks without fail. So if nothing else, I have got outside, even in the rain, put my coat and the hood up, 10-minute walk to allow me to just change my physical state. If I have time, I try to do a 1-hour walk in the evening with a podcast. Sometimes it's 40 minutes. The ideal is an hour. But that's a bonus to my day. But every day I make sure there's movement. I don't get up at 5 a.m. doing Pilates and putting my legs around my head, and, you know, I'm not meditating in that conventional way. I do box breathing when I make a cup of tea. So in the minute and a half.
What's box breathing?
So visualize a box. Close your eyes, visualize a box.
Okay.
So I want you, now I don't want to see your shoulders move when you do this, right? Because that's, particularly as women, we breathe up. I want you to imagine your belly is a balloon. So I want you to breathe in for 4. So you're getting all that oxygen in. So you're going along one side of the box. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 4. Hold for 4.
I just want to fall asleep now.
But
so
that,
relaxing.
but it also allows you to reground yourself. Like that 2 or 3 times. You can do that sitting because you don't have to close your eyes. You can do it sitting at the traffic lights.
So you don't have to do an hour-long yoga session to chill out.
This is about micro habits. If you imagine the more micro habits you can incorporate into your day at times that suit you, like if you're collecting kids from school or after school and you've got 2 or 3 minutes, don't go on your phone scrolling. Because you'll have scrolled before. So I'm not saying stop scrolling, but use the time pockets you have to focus on your care of self. Like one of the things I always talk about, my purple alien. I don't know if I've mentioned my
No, I have never heard about that.
So do you practice mindfulness?
So probably not. I do yoga, but I don't have time to practice mindfulness. But when I do yoga, I always think after it, oh my God, I wish I did that more often. And my mind goes off in ways when I'm doing yoga that it wouldn't normally. And sometimes I come up with real humdingers of ideas for things. And I do an awful lot of thinking. But in terms of mindfulness, as in just sitting down with my thoughts, I don't have the time for that.
Yeah. And most people don't. And that's why most people don't do it. But I can tell you, everybody actually practices mindfulness because everybody has a thing that they do. So whether some people like baking, some people like cooking, some people love jigsaws, some people love lifting weights and do go to the gym. Mindfulness, again, this is, we've been sold a narrative where it's the wellness industry is trying to get people, they're putting mindfulness out there and they want them to be an expert, be able to be sitting with themselves for 20 minutes or longer, emptying their head. If you do something that takes your full entire attention, that's mindfulness.
So scrolling on your phone then, mindfulness?
Minus scrolling on your phone. But one of the things, I did a course in mindfulness, and one of the things we had to do was, one week we had to walk in a room, I think there was about 40 of us, for a solid hour, as slowly as possible. And it was without talking, making noise, anything. And it was at that point I thought, right, this there has to be another way. And I created what I call my purple alien. And on one of my walks through the day for a couple of minutes, I unless I have to, I don't take my phone with me on those little mini walks. But I created this, and I always say to people, do whatever you want. But this is the visual I have, is this little purple alien lives in the sky, can't see down here.
Okay.
Right? Fascinated by the world that I live in. So for a couple of minutes while I'm walking, I in my head will describe everything I can hear, see and smell. So I live at the back of a school. There's some beautiful trees. So it might be the kids are out in the yard playing. The buds are coming on the trees. The grass has just been cut, the smell. So the more detail I observe to tell my little purple alien, the more I'm not thinking I need to get to Laura's for such a time. I need to do shopping. I need to get the food. I'm in the present moment. That's mindfulness.
Okay.
Like
how many of us nowadays are walking, and I'm guilty of this too, walking while we're on our phone and not even noticing. A lady actually walked across the road in front of my car the other day. She was on her phone. I actually could have killed her. She just walked straight out. Yeah. So it's that mindfulness, as in just being aware of the environment. I think that we were so much better. And it isn't, phones have brought so much, but obviously they're hugely detrimental to a lot of people's mental health as well. Did you see that article there was an article in the Financial Times there a couple of weekends ago about the devastating effects having on our children's mental health, social media. And I did put a question up on Instagram and a question box, and lots of people are very worried about their children. And it is worrying, isn't it?
And actually it was, I don't know whether it's Japan or China. It's one of the Asian countries. So apologies for not getting this right. They have started to put traffic lights down in the ground, like as in, cat's eyes on the roads. Because
oh my goodness,
I saw a picture of
That's crazy, isn't it?
Because people have their heads.
Yeah.
So it's like where I am. I have two little dogs as well, and I can let the dogs off the lead. It's a tiny little park, and the majority of people who are there with dogs are all on their phones, and it might be an important call. It might be, but I'm not saying give up anything. I'm just saying create those micro moments that are that you can fit in. It's not about trying to find more time, finding an hour to go to a class, finding an hour, half an hour to do journaling. They're all great things if you have a life where you have that extra time, but the majority of people, we don't.
Okay.
So let's move away from the big things, see those as the bonuses. And what are the things, because this is every single day. These are not one-offs, 2 days a week doing something is not your care of self. That's like, would you brush your teeth 2 days a week?
Okay. Interesting.
This is
that.
Yeah, this is your mental, emotional and physical well-being.
And this will all contribute to the avoidance of burnout, am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
See the way I looped it all the way back to the start now? Aren't I good?
Very good. Very good.
I want to talk to you about how did you get your degree in psychotherapy how did you get the balls to go and just do it? Because you said that you didn't have that confidence in yourself because you hadn't done the Leaving Cert. So
I'd made a decision a couple of years in, was actually shortly after my second lad was born. I had gone back to work and I remember my boss saying, now I hope you have a really good social support network behind you. Mum was down in West Wicklow. My dad was still working full time and it's just me. And I thought...
Were your parents separated?
Yeah, my parents separated when I was 5.
Okay.
So I was kind of like, oh, how's that going to work? And the second day back at work, I had to go to a meeting in London. So I knew this wasn't going to be sustainable, doing the corporate and juggling it all. And so somewhere along the lines, I kind of, and again, impulsive behavior, I bought a franchise for baby sign language just to throw something completely different into my world.
Okay.
So I used to teach babies with their mums or dads, able-bodied babies, to communicate before they could speak.
So not deaf babies?
Not deaf babies.
Okay.
So I made the decision to left McDonald's, had this going. It was huge in the UK. I was the first to bring it into Ireland. Decided that I wanted to do an evening course in something, went to Rathmines in Dublin and was doing a 6-week introductory course to psychotherapy. Now, bear in mind, I'd done loads of therapy, since I was probably about 14 at this stage. So at the end of the first lecture, I went up to the guy and very nice. And I said, look, I'm not trying to be, he was talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I went, I'm not trying to be cheeky, but like I've done a lot and I know this. And he said, well, why don't you do a degree? It started, because this was about September, and he said it started, I think you will have missed 1 or 2 weeks, gave me the name, where to go, called the person, sort of put it all together. It was 1 day a week. So I was doing the baby sign language in a couple of different venues. Mum would come up and sort the lads out on the Monday. I would do full day of lectures and got my degree. 3 years. So
was the baby sign language popular?
It was massive in the UK. I really struggled because the insurance for them in the UK was really, really cheap. My insurance...
Welcome into Ireland, yeah.
In the UK, venues were offering spaces because communities wanted to have this.
Okay.
So like they might get... My counterparts in the UK might get charged like a tenner for venue hire. I was being charged like 50, 60 euro for an hour. Like it was a hard battle. But you know what's really lovely? There are still, 15 years later, there are still groups, little Facebook groups of my different classes who have stayed friends.
Okay. As
they've had life changes, moved countries, illnesses, and they still communicate with each other.
Okay.
And because it was half an hour of a very structured class and then half an hour of tea and coffee and biscuits and chats.
Yeah.
It was lovely. It was
actually like a mother and toddler, just a little bit different, yeah?
It was back when we didn't have mother and toddler.
Okay.
So cutting edge. again. Always like, must do it best, must be the first. So I was sort of doing that. I had the house. I think I went on, with full transparency, because I'm sure people are going, well, how did she actually afford? I think I went on interest only with my mortgage. The kids were much smaller, so they weren't eating me out of house and home.
As lads do.
As big lads do. I'm jumping in years. I think they were, the eldest would have started school. So it was, it was a little bit, the timings were different. And when I started, because what's really interesting is, in order to graduate with your degree back then, it's changed a little now. You have to have 100 hours of clinical work and signed off. You need to be working with a supervisor, and that's fine. That's you can get your degree and you've passed all your assignments. But in order to become accredited, and there's a lot of people out there who don't go down this road just because it's so arduous. You then have to do 450 hours of clinical work, again, signed off, approved by your supervisor, before you can be accredited. And so what happens is, a lot of people will do low cost or no cost in order to get their hours up. So it's really interesting, from a very beginning within this industry, you don't put a price on your head. You're giving your services for next to nothing, because the end goal is to get the accreditation. Was
there something on the prime time there a couple of weeks ago about...
That was psychologists. And
isn't that scary, the unregulated business in Ireland?
But so psychotherapy.
Okay. So how do you know that you're going to someone?
You don't. Well, for anybody going to a psychotherapist, I think it's really important. And when I was working purely as a psychotherapist, I've often been interviewed by prospective clients of, what's your accreditation? Are you accredited? Where did you go to college? What areas do you specialize in? And I think that's really important. That's not the only side of psychotherapy. The flip side is the connection you make with somebody is equally as important, because you can go to somebody who has masters coming out of their ears, and if you don't have a connection with that person, so again, it goes back to that trial and error. If you go and see a psychotherapist and you don't connect with them, don't write that off. It mightn't seem, you mightn't have the energy to do it, but do go and, find another one. Get a referral of somebody who's been to somebody. Don't give up on the first one.
Do doctors refer people to psychotherapists?
Yeah, a lot would refer. But it's, I think, nearly word of mouth, because if you've got somebody that who knows you, who can recommend somebody, I think it's always a really good starting point. But yeah, it's not regulated. And they've been talking about regulating psychotherapy since I graduated. They've been talking about, for here in Ireland, it's Coru, and every year, we're still talking about it. So it's I accredited, and my coaching is accredited. I have always maintained that, even though I still don't practice as a psychotherapist. I still keep my supervision up once a month, because I think I'm just indoctrinated into doing it. So
you don't see clients anymore?
I have a few therapy clients that I have had for a long time. And I suppose ethically, I wouldn't say, okay, that's it. I'm not, I don't do this line of work anymore. So yes, I do. But now the bulk of my business is working with individuals recovering from burnout, and then also working with organizations and speaking with it. I'm speaking at a big HR event in the States in 10 days in April. And it's about changing the way we see well-being and wellness. And, it's not the externals. And if I can work with the individuals, but there's only so many individuals in a week I can work with. If I can work with the corporations and get them to stop doing the ticking boxes.
Oh God, the box ticking is just so arduous, isn't it?
And work with them on what their needs are. Like if I work with a company now, whether it's just a 3-month plan, my first thing is, do I have permission to send a questionnaire to all your staff that comes back to me that has nothing to do with you? So I get to ask the questions of what the pain points are, so I can deliver what they need and not an off the shelf what the company thinks they need. Okay. Because if I'm delivering, I want the people that are listening to me or working with me to come away going, I can do that. That I can do. That I can do. Okay. Because they don't need an added stress. They're already stressed.
So can I ask you then, so you got your degree in psychotherapy and you were seeing clients and you were dealing with people, but you still weren't diagnosed yourself with your ASD or your ADHD. So how were you coping with life?
But you see, interesting. So at this point, quite organically, I had, not realizing, structured a world because I was working one-to-one. Very good at that. I'm in my happy place. Not overwhelming. Ethically, you're not supposed to see more than 16 clients a week. Okay. So there you go. Like that's good. I wasn't drinking, so I wasn't out socially. I was running. I didn't like shift into this mad, like, the way people say, oh, I gave up drinking and I lost all this weight. I clearly didn't fall into that camp. But I was making an effort to mind myself. I still wasn't.
Were you doing a little bit of self-care?
Doing a little bit. I was going to nearly slipped out. But you see, isn't it? But I still felt, but I still underlyingly didn't feel a huge amount of difference. Okay. Like life was easier, but the internal chatter wasn't.
That's interesting because Keith Walsh was on my podcast, who you and I both know well.
Yes.
Introduced us to each other. And he said that he was always seeking, what is it? Like, what's wrong with me? Or like, why do I always feel crap? And he gave up drink and he gave this and he still didn't feel any different. He was off drink a year and he was like, what the hell? Like, why do I still feel the way I did? I thought it was the drink, or I thought it was this. Or So you were searching for that kind of answer too, were you? Or
like at this stage, I wasn't taking antidepressants. I wasn't taking, like, clean as a whistle, but it was still there. So I trained in NLP, Master Practitioner in Neuro-Linguistic Programming, put that under my belt. Did that make a difference?
What's Neuro-Linguistic Programming?
So I suppose it's a bit more, I don't really, it has quite a lot of negative, it's quite dark is really what I would say, but it used in the right way. It's about changing the way we think, and using the power of hypnosis to reprogram the way we think. It's actually used an awful lot in car sales, secondhand car sales or car sales.
And why?
That's what.
Why did you say it's dark then?
Because there are some practitioners who would be from the States, very senior, well-known gurus, like motivational gurus, who have been accused of using it to influence younger girls.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's, there is, so clearly I do not do any of that, but I do use hypnosis in providing people want to try it. I would use it depending on who the clients are. But then I very like Keith, I was training now. At this point now I'm training and I'm really strong and I'm really fit, and I know what I'll do. I'll go off and certify as a personal trainer. So I added that to my belt. Now, I'm glad I did that, because when I talk about that positive health aspect, it's not, let's talk about your emotions and, forget about the rest of your body. You're not cut off from your neck down or vice versa. So, but that's why I would focus on movement rather than, right, you're burnt out, let's get you into lifting weights. Because a lot of people think when they're burnt out, I need to release stress. But if you're at that level of burnout and your cortisol and your adrenaline is depleted, the last thing you need to do is go for a run or be lifting weights or putting that.
And actually talking about the neurochemical imbalances when you are burnt out. So please explain what happens to the body neurochemically wise. Your cortisol goes.
Your cortisol goes,
and your cortisol is your fight or flight.
So your cortisol is, we instinctively, so a car pulls out in front of you, you don't think I must slam on the brakes. Your body will automatically make you slam on the brakes.
Mm-hmm.
So because you've gone into fight or flight response, you will have that rush of adrenaline, which will very quickly, you might get the shakes, you might, you'll get out of the car. Now, nobody's been hit, nobody's been injured. Somebody will say to you, have a cup of tea, they'll couple of sugars, give her some chocolate, get your sugar levels up, because to go along with when we're burnt out, our cortisol getting depleted, when we have that adrenaline rush, we have a glucose rush. Mm-hmm. So, which is why we feel so low afterwards, and we need that little boost of sugar. So our actual glucose is being depleted as well, which is really not talked about a lot. So hence why a lot of people who are on the edge of burnout will crave sweet things or carbs to get that sugar fix through the day, because they don't have it. In a normal fight or flight situation, you reset. Your body will go, that was scary, all sorted. You reset, cortisol goes back to normal, everything goes back to normal, and you get on with your day. If you're in a continual high stress situation that you're living, you're in fight or flight constantly. You're not going back into what's called rest and digest. So you've got rest and digest, then you've got fight or flight, and then you've got freeze. Freeze, let's call that chronic burnout. So rest and digest is not lying on the sofa eating Doritos, watching Netflix. Rest and digest is where your body is working at its optimum level. So your cognitive ability, your decision-making ability is all really good. You're sleeping well. Your body's actually digesting food. Your bowels are working. You're socially connected to people. Like everything is, that's where we're in rest and digest. We live there. That's where we should live. Every day we will tip into fight or flight. They might be small stresses. They might be big stresses. Some of them, once a month, we might have, bigger stress, but we go from here. So green, orange is fight or flight. We go green, orange, green, orange. That's okay. All the time. If we are living in fight or flight, if we're living in orange, in amber, not tipping back down into green, we will then go up into freeze. And once you're in freeze, that's where you've got your digestive issues. That's where your decision-making ability, you're irritable, you're tearful, you might have alcohol dependency or substance dependency. You are feeling disconnected because you're in freeze. Your body has just gone, there's nothing more. I can't keep going. Okay. So to get from there back down here requires a lot of work, and I see it, people who are there in that freeze, who come to work with me, individuals, it takes nearly 3 weeks of me working with them before they're even in a position to start doing the work, which I know sounds, because they're so used to, okay, need to fix this. But it's literally, as I called it, it's turning the dial down. It's like
turning the noise down as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's turning it all down, not turning it up, or keeping it up, but to turn it down and actually just start slowly.
Okay. So can we talk about your diagnosis of ADHD and how that came about and how you feel since your diagnosis, and if that has changed, if the diagnosis has changed your life, or are you still just carrying on as normal?
It's the most bizarre thing. That's all I would have always said, I remember reading a book about 20 years ago. I think it was called You're Not Stupid, or it was one of the first books that was written about ADHD. And I would have always, in my adult life, felt I was ADHD. Now, the autism wouldn't have even, I wouldn't have had any real understanding about it. I would have had that very stereotypical understanding, and probably had a fairly stereotypical understanding of ADHD, but just felt from the distracted part, the inability to concentrate. My eldest was diagnosed when he was about 7. But really interestingly, he presents completely differently to me. He does, sometimes he has a great saying, not as much as I do. Now, I would need this all the time. He'd say, yeah, my social battery is worn out. I just need some downtime. Just need to recharge. Like if he's been out with the lads on a Friday night and they're all going out again on a Saturday night, and I say, you're not going out, he'll go, no, I need to recharge. Yeah. And for him, the Xbox, that's that multisensory, which was really interesting because I fought with that when he was a kid, when I didn't have that understanding. That's how he recharges.
By playing on computer games?
Yeah. Because of the energy it would have taken him through the school day to keep it together and interact with people. And then he'd come home and I'd go, well, there's no Xbox because it's Tuesday. And, then World War III would break out, and I was parenting against who he was. And it took a lot for me to learn how to parent with him.
But are video games not just all bad for all kids?
No.
Okay.
No, it's for that way of unwinding. See, he's different to me. I don't need the television to unwind. I read. That's, okay. So, and his younger brother, I'm actually going to get assessed shortly because he would be much more like me. Then there is the impulsive behaviors, but I can see so for me, my hyperness is my head. It's not the external. I'm not loud. I'm not, to all intents and purposes, if you didn't know me, you wouldn't go, there'd be nothing obvious that would make you think.
Throw the concert at her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I would have impulsive behaviors, the drugs, alcohol.
Yeah.
The decision after 3 weeks to I'll just have a baby. Yeah. There were other options. It moved to London, move back, move to London, buy a house. I can look back now. So because of my son being diagnosed, I learned a huge amount that wasn't the stereotypical. And again, being very honest, I went privately for myself. And it took until probably this year for me to be in a position to go, okay, now I can afford to invest in me, because it's not cheap to do this. So I had my assessment in January, was told very quickly, by the end it was 2 hours, definitely ADHD, and that we'd explore, there was very possibly ASD, which is subsequently been confirmed as well. And then of course I had the options of, so that having the diagnosis, I wasn't, it didn't throw me, it wasn't something, it was actually quite comforting initially. I decided to go down the road of trying meds. I was really nervous because, as somebody who had used drugs in the past, recreationally, had used them as a self-soother, had used alcohol, had used things like that, I was very nervous of how I was going to react, not from the side effects, but just, was I suddenly going to be like a mad raving lunatic and addicted? And but I thought, right, I'm under the care and supervision. I will do this for a month. I expressed my concerns. It was a game changer. I take 2 different types of meds. I take ADHD meds, and I take a serotonin, because with ADHD, I also don't have a huge, parts of my brain basically don't accept serotonin. So it is an antidepressant, but it's not the conventional antidepressant like Prozac.
What is it?
It is, I'll have to actually send you the name, because they're all, you would know these medical names. Yeah. These are all, put V and an X and an E and a couple of L's in it and make it about 12 letters. Is
it an SSRI or is it something different?
No, it's an S.
NRI.
Yes.
SSNRI. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that bit I do know.
Okay.
So I take that. I didn't start taking that until about a month, 6 weeks into being on the ADHD meds, because you start off at a very low dose and then work up until you find your happy space.
What's your happy space?
On the one that I take, which is Equisum XL, I take 40 milligrams in the morning and then 40 milligrams 6 hours later.
Okay.
So
can you sleep with that?
I have never slept so well.
Okay.
Because that was a real concern, because I didn't want to flip my sleeping. When I go to bed, I read about 3 pages of my Kindle.
And you're asleep.
And I'm gone.
Okay, well, that's a good sign. That's a sign that the meds are working, because that's what they're supposed to do. Keep you awake for the hours that you're supposed to keep you awake, keep you level-headed and calm in the way possible. Not dull you in any way, but just keep you focused, and then you should be able to fall asleep and stay asleep and have 2 sleep cycles, at least. So you get all your good sleep. So that's good.
I get. And that was the other thing, actually, what you said about dulling you. Because my eldest had taken meds for about 6 or 7 months when he was 12. And it was a horrible experience for him and for me. And it did dull him, and he did choose. It was awful. I mean, I could go on about that. But one of the things he would say is, I just feel dulled. I'm more creative, I'm not, that part of me is not dulled at all, but I am focused on the boring tasks. So absolutely, if I open Twitter, I could hyper-focus down the Twitter for 3 hours. It doesn't make me go, I'm not going to go onto Twitter today.
Right, yeah, okay.
So you do need to learn what's going to work for you in your structures, in your organizational skills, whether it's, your home life or your work life. You have to meet it halfway. The meds do one part, but you have to do the other part. But the SSNI, what that did is I never realized I had crippling anxiety my whole life.
Yeah.
Until I started taking that. And it was like my anxiety was at a 10 and it suddenly went to a 1 or 2. So I was a couple of minutes late coming up to you. 6 months ago, my whole insides would have been, now I was 4 minutes late. I would have been.
I wasn't even ready for you because I was on the phone giving out to the bank. But anyway,
I would have been
anxious.
It literally, it would have been in my stomach, and it would have gone up to my throat, and then I would have been quite jittery. Now, again, I would have known it. You probably wouldn't. I felt it because I was annoyed that I was going to be a few minutes late, but I was able to rationalize my thought. So it's not, again, that my real true feelings have gone, but they don't take over.
Okay. And you know, with the ADHD, there is that underlying free floating anxiety that you may not realize that you have. So it's important to, like, when you are looking at the medication with the doctor, that as well as the stimulant medication, that they are potentially looking at the SNRI or whatever other SSRI that they might look for. So you feel like a different person. Do you wish you got seen 2 years ago?
Well, I thought, like, because I think there's, you know, parking the adaptability and to all of this. The other side is, you know, how do I feel? Let's be all touchy-feely about this. How do I feel about not being diagnosed in school? How do I feel about, you know, running away? And had I been assessed, had it been a thing back then, where would I be? But the reality, and I know this sounds really wishy-washy, I wouldn't be sitting here, Laura. I wouldn't be doing what I do. I wouldn't. Now I can work 18-hour days. Like, I have a level of contentment in who I am. And I definitely think the twisting road that I've taken to get here has been worth it. Do I want my kids to take drugs like I do? Absolutely not. You know,
when you say drugs like you do you mean, you don't mean the prescribed drugs?
No. You know, the
party,
the madness,
party animal stuff.
The madness.
Okay, yeah.
You know, do I want them to have that? How do I fit in? Where do I fit in? No. And that's one of the reasons why I'm getting my younger lad assessed, is not about putting him down the med route, but to give me an understanding if he is or if he isn't. And if he is, how best can I support him? Whether the med route happens or not in a year or two when he's closer to the leaving, and if he wants to do it. Mm-hmm. But it's about, I really do think, like, I could have very easily not gone down the meds route, because knowledge, understanding who we are. Like, I asked this question when I the last couple of weeks, I've done a lot of group work with companies in Europe and in the States. And I will ask this question to everyone on my little Zoom: who are you? And please don't tell me what you do. And I have professional people who struggle to tell me who they are, because most people don't know who they are.
Because they're so defined by their work, or...
They're so defined, and they're so on that roller coaster. You know, I'm a lawyer. I'm a legal secretary. I'm a whatever you are. Like, who are you?
Whereas if you ask a little child that, I'm thinking of my little fella, you know.
What would he say?
What he'd say. He'd say he's a footballer, or he'd say he'd just say his name, you know.
Yeah.
And that's important to start off with that, isn't it?
But that's, you know, the focus on the external and performing has become so important, that who we are, you know, I'm an introvert. I'm a great baker. I get joy from baking. Like, whatever. We don't come out with that.
So interesting, isn't it? Where can people find your book?
So
it's called?
The Burnout Solution. Clearly the Burnout Solution. Can be found at all leading bookstores. Okay. And it's on audio as well.
A lot of people like that, because they can then just download it and listen to it while they're going for their walks. That's great. Yeah. And then, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up about burnout and about the tools, the people that we've mentioned, the micro changes?
Start with the micro. You know, sleep is really important. When I say, you know, and I talk about it in the book, nutrition, you know, it's not about a diet. It's finding what foods nourish you, what foods are good for you. Again, it's not a one size fits all. Like, find what nourishes you and predominantly eat that way, you know, eat those foods. And then the outside bits, you know, have the other things that you like. Don't get caught up in exercise. Focus on, you know, if you do nothing, if you sit at your desk all day and at home working remotely and you do absolutely nothing, start doing a 15-minute walk.
Okay.
Find one thing that you're not giving attention to, focus on that for a week or two, and then add. Like you didn't get burnt out overnight. You're not going to reverse it overnight either.
Okay.
So stop putting the bar so high in your having to achieve that it's unobtainable. Lower the bar, reach that bar, and then move the bar higher.
Okay.
So it's not about lowering.
And your pot's full. So take out something out of your pot before you put something back in. Is that right?
Otherwise the water just keeps flowing over.
Okay. I love that little analogy. Yeah. I read the first chapter of your book.
Very good. Very good. So you don't know why my company's called Twisting the Jar then?
No.
So I will finish on
I love
this.
You too, yeah.
This is because it relates to every single person. Is the company's called Twisting the Jar. My new planner is called Twisting the Plan. But Twisting the Jar, my mum separated when I was 5. She was 32. We went back to live with my granny. Mum went to work one day as a 32-year-old in an ad agency, collapsed and there's a really positive ending to the story. So trigger alert. She had a brain aneurysm.
Okay.
Went into hospital, semi-paralyzed down her left side for about 6 or 7 months. She came out of hospital, I think 2 or 3 months after the initial, after it happened. She then, about 6 months later, had a full nervous breakdown. She doesn't mind me talking about this, because she couldn't cope with not being able to do what she could before. Did a stint through that. Roll on. She then got the motion back on her left side. Has always left her slightly weaker on her left side. So roll on. I was in my teens. We were living in a little grotty flat in Dublin. No money. We didn't have a bean. And she had just set up one of the first employment agencies in the 80s in the middle of a really, really hard recession. And I will never forget this. We were standing in the kitchen and she was making spaghetti bolognese and she wanted to twist a jar open. And because remember, she didn't have that full power, she couldn't twist. So she's pottering around the kitchen and she asked me to twist the jar open. But you see, now here's the thing. If I asked you, what other ways are there? If you can't open a jar, what ways are there to open that jar? If you can't twist it open, what other ways are there to twist?
Well, you could smash the jar, but that's not going to help anyone.
No.
You could use a spoon to pop the popper up.
Yeah. Stab it on the top with the knife. Yeah. Release the pressure.
Yeah.
Use a rubber glove.
Yes.
Run it under hot water.
Yes.
Like there's loads of ways. If you're on your own, you don't have someone to help and you're stuck, you can do it. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get stressed. You're just not going to be left in your happy place. But Mum asked me to twist the jar open, which I did and handed back. And instead of thinking to herself, I can't twist that jar open because I'm weaker, because my left side, because this happened to me and I can't do X, Y, Z, she asked for help in one component of what she was doing, which was making dinner. So as soon as she had that, she could go back to doing what she could do best. So the whole point of twisting the jar is, yes, there are times where we have to do it on our own, that we don't have somebody to ask for help. But when you can, and there is somebody there, ask for help so that you can focus on what you do best instead of trying to do everything perfectly, because we can't do all of the things.
Very true.
And twisting the jar is about knowing how to ask for help, when to ask for help, and being comfortable with asking for help.
And avoiding burnout.
And avoiding burnout.
Siobhan, what piece of advice would you have for our young people today?
Learn for as long as you can. Because it doesn't matter what you learn. The minute that you start working, you're going to be working pretty much for the rest of your life. And when I say learn, everybody has something to teach you. For young people who are in school, go to college, don't go to college, but find something that you're interested in. For people in their 20s who have new jobs, young jobs, we're not meant to stay in jobs. We're not robots for the rest of our lives. We can change. It's not one size fits all. You know, be true to who you are. This is one life. It's not, don't make yourself unhappy and burnt out because you have chosen to do something to please other people. It's really hard to go against the grain. It's really hard to be who you are. Know who you are, be honest with who you are, and ask for help and learn.
Okay. And Siobhan, what is the meaning of life?
Oh, the meaning of life. I think it is that level of contentment that you get. For me, the meaning of life is the level of contentment and that bursting feeling when I go out in the morning and I see the little old man with his two little old dogs and we have a little chat and he's made my morning and I hope to think I've made his. And we both walk away and I know nothing about him. He knows nothing about me. And that feeling inside, that to me makes me feel alive.
That's lovely. Siobhan, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you so much.
Anyone can access your book, and Twisting Your Jar. The jar is where they'll find you as well, all right?
Absolutely, yep. Social media, website.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.